Hey everyone, I just wanted to give a little bit of a recap in case you were unable to attend class this week. Perhaps you were still there and you just needed some refreshers as well. So as you know at this point, we are transitioning from Module 1, our literacy narratives, to Module 2, working on academic research, looking at how we use I in a formal academic paper, and learning about how to use our databases at UNG. And so if you missed class or need a brief refresher, I highly recommend clicking through some of the support videos and things like that on the UNG website. But a couple key points to think about for your research project. On Friday, your topic selection is due. If you are picking between two topics, feel free to submit both, and I'll help you narrow down based on how you rationalize which topic and why. Do know that I really do mean any topic is fair game. There are a few topics that I might veto if they could cause harm to some of your other peers, but in general, I've very, very rarely, like maybe once in the past 12 years, vetoed a project topic. So I really want you to be able to research something that you're truly interested in, whether it is a current event issue, a global issue, maybe you're interested in animals, your career paths, things like that. So when you are using our databases, there might be some things that become frustrating. Number one, you might find that accessing Galileo can be a little bit complicated. That might be because you are using your own technology or are completely remote. Theoretically, you can log in using your regular UNG password and username. But if you need what is called the Galileo password, you can Google UNG Galileo password and it will take you to the page where you can find that. When you are finding sources, there are a couple of things that are available to you to make it easier to have your citations and things like that. So you have a cite button where you can actually search for your MLA or APA works cited or references page entry. I highly recommend grabbing that information for every source you might use. That way you've got it to build that references or works cited page. The other thing you want to keep in mind is that even if you're using a database, that does not automatically make the sources that you find scholarly. Several of the databases that we have a box that you can check for scholarly or peer-reviewed articles. When you are looking specifically for your scholarly sources, I highly suggest checking that box. You also want to be sure that you save every PDF that you think you want to use. You can do that in a couple of ways. I suggest either hitting the email button, and that allows you to bring it to you in your email so that you have it if you end up wanting to use it. Most likely you are doing this research on your own technology. So feel free to just simply download your PDFs, maybe create a folder and store all the things you might use for this project in that same spot. Since we're using Google Docs for our writing, you might also consider using Google Drive to save your documents if you don't want to take up space on your computer. Save everything. You cannot guarantee that you will find the sources again in the same way. And so that can become very frustrating if you're like, oh, that's a good source, I'm going to use it, I'll just search for it later. Don't do that. Also consider having multiple search terms. So most of the time when you're finding sources, if you're struggling to find sources that are useful for your project, it means you need to tweak your search terms. So search terms can range from things that you weren't expecting to what you were expected. So if you were writing a research project on dolphins, perhaps you start with the word dolphin, but you only get a certain kind of source. And so maybe you also include different oceans. right? Different kinds of sea life live in different oceans. Perhaps you include phrases like marine biology or mammals, right? Things that will connect to dolphins, but might not be quite as obvious. When you are trying to think of additional search terms, if that's something that you need, there's a Ask a Librarian chat on our library website. It is not a 24-hour service, but that's a great place to kind of brainstorm additional terms to search for when you are doing your own research. So when you're thinking about finding sources, you want to spend a goodly amount of time doing that. You'll notice that nothing is due regarding Project 2 until September 25th. That's so that you have time to collect, select, and read sources. You'll also notice that the first thing that's due then is actually a working bibliography. So it's just a list of the sources that you've compiled at this point. That will help you be able to pace yourself in this project. So being sure that you have multiple search terms, using our databases. Galileo is a great place to start. Depending on your topic, there might be a topic-specific database. I also tend to recommend using Academic Search Complete. I dissuade students from using Google Scholar, mostly because we have databases that have paid accesses to journal articles and things like that. Google Scholar may not actually be able to give you access to the source that you find. You're only finding 6 sources. You need 3 scholarly sources and 3 non-scholarly sources. Non-scholarly sources are anything that are not peer-reviewed. TED Talks, YouTube videos, blogs, news articles, magazine articles, lots of options here. And they are all valid ways to gain information. So in addition to your search terms and giving yourself time, you want to consider using the Cite button so that you have the Works Cited or References page entry. You want to be sure that you skim through your articles, and then once you've collected the number that you need, actually start doing some active reading, reading slowly, looking up words that you may not know. Academic sources particularly tend to use different definitions of the words sometimes when we expect. So that will help you understand the content so that you can use them successfully in Project 2. So there's some brief recaps of what we talked about in terms of source collection this week. We also talked about it's a very specific difference between scholarly and non-scholarly. Both kinds of sources can be credible and valuable. Scholarly sources truly attest to the publication process. So scholarly sources can take anywhere between 2 months and 2 years to hit publication. And that's because scholarly articles and books are vetted by several reviewers who are peers in the field. And so that helps bolster ethos, it helps bolster credibility, and it helps assess validity of the content of those articles. And so you can sort of presume that scholarly sources are credible and trustworthy, but that doesn't mean you should just blindly accept the information that's there either. You can also find credible sources that are not scholarly. You just sometimes have to pay attention a little bit more, looking at who owns the publication space, right? Who funds it? Who their general audience is, because when we read information, bias is not something that we can completely erase as a reader or as a writer. And so sometimes there are biases, but we don't always notice bias or opinion that directly aligns with our own. And so being sure that you think about that as you select your sources. Something that has bias or even obvious opinion does not discredit or make the source unusable. It just simply means you have to acknowledge those levels of bias and which helps you think about what you want to use from that source. So that's the gist of what we covered in class Monday and Wednesday, depending on your Team Avengers or Team Justice League class meeting. I'll also be uploading a video that talks specifically about Project 2. That way you can kind of get a feel for what I mean on the assignment sheet if you don't get to hear me talk about it in class this week. So hopefully that helps you find sources. And then if you have questions, you can always email or tweet questions. Don't forget to reply to Twitter questions that I post. They tend to be about what we're doing at hand. And you can expect brief feedback and points for Project 1. Which was the signal at the end of Module 1. Most likely by Monday next week, I want to make sure I can give feedback to other things, and so a final grade can kind of pause. We're not working on that project anymore, but you can expect that then.